Okay, this slide, is going to show you the types of reproduction. So if you look at the picture, we have our mature cell in the middle, and in favorable conditions, it's going to go to the right. So it's going to go through mitosis. During mitosis, the cell divides, and what you end up getting is daughter cells that are going to develop a flagella. Most of these things are in water, and they're haploid. Now, if you look to the left, actually it goes from the center here down to the bottom. You have your mature cell, and this is going to be in unfavorable conditions. Remember, these things reproduce asexually during favorable conditions and then sexually in unfavorable. So the mature cell will undergo mitosis and produce the gametes, and then the gametes fuse. And when that happens, they form a diploid zygote. And more often than not, this diploid zygote can withstand harsh conditions, and then when the conditions are favorable, it undergoes meiosis, produces the haploid cells, and we're back to square one. So this is actually called alternation of generations, and that means we're alternating a haploid generation with a diploid generation, which will split into a haploid. So that's what alternating generations mean. Many organisms undergo this type of reproduction. We'll run into this as well when we get to fungus. Now, this is triggered, usually the sexual part of it is triggered by the environment. So, again, like I said, if it is unfavorable, it's going to reproduce sexually. Favorable, it will reproduce asexually. All right, we have to finish our fungus-like protists and then we're done. So, as decomposers, our fungus-like protists play a very important role in breaking down and recycling nutrients. They can recycle carbon if they're breaking down the wood and other types of organic material on the forest floor. And the reason that they very much act like fungus, but they're not, and one of the main reasons is because they're capable of movement. True fungus is not capable of movement, but our fungus-like protist can move. And they have an amoeboid type of movement where they ooze along, but this is not something that's representative of true fungi, so they could not be in the fungi kingdom. All right, our first phyla is called Myxomycota. Now, anything that ends with mycota means that it's a fungus. There's about 700 species, and these are called the plasmodial slime molds. During the feeding stage, a plasmodial slime mold is just this mass of cytoplasm, and that mass of cytoplasm is actually called a plasmodium. Do not confuse this with plasmodium that causes malaria. It's not the same thing. This is a mass of cytoplasm. You can see it over there to the right, and it's the actual feeding stage. Now, it says it's multinucleate, which means there's many, many nuclei because there's not any cross walls or anything that is separating the cells. So if there's not, all the nuclei are just in there going back and forth, and there's nothing to demarcate the cells. They're not separated from one another. So each plasmodium is going to have a lot of the diploid nuclei, and they're not separated by cell walls. Now, as the plasmodium creeps along the forest floor, what they're doing is they're releasing these enzymes and they're consuming these dead and decaying leaves, any other debris, and they're phagocytizing it. Remember, phagocytosis is where they reach out and they grab a food. Pinocytosis was a liquid, so they're grabbing a solid food and they're bringing it in. So they're very, very powerful phagocytizers. Now, when the food or water is scarce, the plasmodium is going to start to reproduce, and you can see that here. And what it does is it forms these fruiting bodies. Anything above ground is called a fruiting body, and they produce spores. They produce haploid spores through meiosis. The spores get real resistant to the harsh conditions, and so um, they don't die. If they did not, if they weren't impermeable to harsh conditions, which would be no food source or a very dry environment, then they would die off. So then, under favorable conditions, they can break open and they can give rise to the haploid reproductive cells. So um, it's all weather related. All right, so here you can see the feeding stage. This is what a plasmodium looks like, and it's just got all these nuclei in there. And then here is a mature plasmodium that is preparing to fruit, which means to reproduce. And then you can see here they produce the young. It's called a sporangium. And then the mature sporangium undergoes, it's on the end of a stalk, it undergoes meiosis, produces spores. The spores germinate, and then we can have opposite mating types. I'm not going to ask you this at all. What I want you to know about reproduction is the alternation of generations. We're not going to get into individual reproductive cycles because they're very confusing. But this picture is representative. So with the plasmodium is a feeding stage, and it's what creeps and oozes along, and it has an amoeboid movement. And as it moves along, it phagocytizes any organic material it runs into. Okay, to wind it up, it's Myxomycota. It's our plasmodial slime mold. Its body plan is unicellular. It's one, but they're multinucleate. They move by means of pseudopodia. They have an amoeboid type movement. They're decomposers. A representative genera is Cerium, but I'm not going to ask you for that.